one of the seasons of the traditional church year. Church year starts with Advent, 4 weeks before Christmas. Then there's the Christmas season, which is 12 days. Then there is Epiphany, which begins today. This is Epiphany Sunday. And then after that comes Lent, 40 days before Easter. After Easter comes Pentecost, which then goes until Advent. So this is Epiphany. And in the rotation of the readings in the traditional church, Epiphany is the Sunday when it's said that the Magi came and visited the baby Jesus. Son of a gun, there they are. It's also known as, alternatively, it's the Sunday when we read about Jesus being baptized. Either way, Epiphany is dynamite. Because what it has to do with is deep insight, deep understanding, deep knowing. And unfortunately, the traditional church could only stomach about maybe a quarter of the message that Jesus had. And the rest of it was either distorted or a bunch of it was just ignored. And one of the benefits of recent scholarship is we've uncovered a bunch of stuff. But you know, there's all kinds of stuff that the traditional church has taught that there's just no basis for. And there's some important stuff that they've ignored that's really valuable. I mean, like the visit of the Magi. What they talk about there was that the Magi were smacked with this insight that the baby in the manger was the child of God. In the baptism narratives, there's a different insight, a different epiphany that's talked about. And that's the epiphany that Jesus has, that he is the child of God. The earliest of the Gospels, which is Mark, lays it out pretty clearly. Now, you know, to talk about Jesus as the child of God, Son of God, you know, if you've been raised in the church, you've heard that your whole life. What we haven't heard, though, is the rest of the story. Jim Merriam, who is a wonderful writer in spirituality, writes about Celtic spirituality, wrote in his book, The Death of the Mythic God, he says, in Christianity, this mythic traditional conception of God has almost completely colored our understanding of Jesus and his teachings. Jesus has been primarily understood not as a human being who realized his own divinity, but as a God or divine being who was sent down from the sky. This God then died on the cross to appease his Father, the sky God, for the sins of humanity. And this has been the central myth of Christianity. Until recent years, literal belief in this myth has been a virtual given among believers in all Christian countries. Now, the problem is that this teaching, which has been there for almost 2,000 years, it doesn't hold up to biblical analysis. It's like the stories of the wise men. We know all kinds of things by the about the wise men. But the problem is not what we know, It's what we know that just isn't so. You know, we tell stories of 3 wise men. Nowhere does it say that there were 3. There might have been 20. There might have been 130. Who knows? You know, the Bible doesn't talk about the wise men being at the manger. It didn't happen. Read the story. They showed up in Bethlehem at the house. You know, there was no scene with the shepherds. There's no talking about camels or cows or ducks. The wise men didn't have names. All of that's myth that's been added to the story. You know, wonderfully so. Actually, I think it was St. Francis of Assisi who assembled the creche scene to have a visual way of demonstrating the story to people that didn't read. But it's just not in the story. And, you know, so we have to understand that there's a bunch of stuff about Jesus that isn't in the traditional teachings. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is pictured as saying, I am the light of the world. John, the last of the Gospels to be written. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says something different. That's what we read today. He said, you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. And what he's saying there is that you are divine. You are children of God. But see, all of those passages about you being holy and you being divine and you being just as much God as Jesus was have just been ignored by the church. There's this great passage that Paul Smith in Integral Christianity calls the Gods Are Us passage. Gods are us. It's where Jesus preaching to the crowds and says, God and I are one. Now, in this story, when Jesus says, God and I are one, this sets the religious teachers of the day on their keisters. They just get ticked. And they say, how can you say such a, how can you equate yourself with God? And and Jesus says, well, it's written in the Psalms. Your scripture says that God says you are God. So, is it true or isn't it? Make up your mind. They get really ticked at it. They don't like it. Fact is that there are all kinds of passages throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New, that directly refer to the divinity that is the core piece of who it is that you are. And it's a tragedy that it is ignored. The tragedy of refusing to hear Jesus' message that we are all divine is that in many ways it has removed Jesus from the human dynamic and made him irrelevant to human experience. I mean, if Jesus is God come to earth, how can I relate to that? It's no big deal that he did all of these great things because he was God. And it means that Jesus can no longer be a model of what is possible in human consciousness. You know, he's no longer relevant of what is possible in human relationships because he wasn't human. He was God. That distortion then means that we can follow Jesus it's really not with much hope. Because if you buy that he was unique, then that means you can't understand that you are holy. That you at your core are divine. See, what I'm saying is that if we read him correctly, the goal is not to follow Christ. The goal is to be Christ. One of the ways that we can think about this is to think of the holy, of the divine, as having three faces that have to be included in our grasping of who it is that we are in relationship to the whole shebang, the one, the all. And I take this from Paul Smith's Integral Christianity. First there is the infinite face of the holy, which is that face of God beyond understanding. It's the mystery. It's what Paul Tillich called the ground of being, the web of life. This is the face of God that holds all things together. It's that great beyond. Second face is the intimate face of the holy, that relational piece which we can sometimes feel in a mystical sense when we experience a presence with us that we can relate to. It's that sense that some people speak of encountering Jesus, and it's that kind of face. And then the third face is one which in Christianity we don't talk a lot about. And that's the face of encountering God as you are. God as you are. This is you, the core self, which is beyond your false ego. Some people call it the Christ nature, or the Buddha nature, or pure awareness, pure consciousness. A lot of names for it. Different faces that we have to incorporate into our integration of the whole understanding of what the divine is. And see, once we do that, once we understand these faces of the holy, then we can understand the importance of Jesus as a model of the spiritual life. If we look, what we see is that through the Jesus stories, Jesus is really speaking in three different ways. He spoke about God. Churches are real good at that. Real good at talking about God. He talked to God. We do some of that. But then he also spoke as God. And what I'm proposing is that those are models for each of you in your own spiritual journey, to learn how to speak as God, to God, about God. If you were to really do that, if you were to really grasp it, what would that be like? Who would you be? What would your life be like if you took seriously the proposition that you were God? I don't know. It's daunting stuff. What would you do if you fully grasped the possibility of living in a joyful connection with the universal face of God on a regular basis? With the universal face, with the intimate face, all at the same time. How might you move towards that kind of consciousness in your own living? What kind of integration would that have to take? Work, family, relationships. What would it mean to you to integrate every relationship that you have as a compassionate, joyful possibility of fullness in living? Something to be celebrated at every moment. Where in your life would you dare to speak truth with deep compassion? Where in your life would you dare to speak deep compassion with truth? Understanding yourself to be holy and divine, by its nature, implies a deep humility. You know, Jesus' critics said, you're being proud, you're setting yourself up. But really what it implies is a deep humility, because it means that you also recognize that everyone around you shares that same core piece of holiness and divinity. What would it mean to pray for the God's best for all those people in your life you hate? You know, question for me was, what would it mean to pray for God's best for Rush Limbaugh? As well as others too. Questions for you this morning. I'd like to do something. I'd like you to sit quietly for a moment. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Bring it in and let it out. And know that your breath is your connection to life. It's an expression of your life. Be aware of what you're hearing. You hear my voice, you hear other voices. There's silence between the sounds. Maybe other sounds coming in. Flow under and around what I'm saying. Feel your body sitting in the chair. Your body, which is the vehicle you have for this adventure through life. Notice your sense of smell. Breathe again deeply. Breathe in these words. Let them into who it is that you are. In India, they say Namaste, which means the divine in me blesses and honors the divine in you. Breathe that in. Namaste. 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 The divine in me blesses and honors the divine in you. The beauty of God sits before me, expressed uniquely as you. shines forth in all that you do. Namaste. 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 The divine in me blesses and honors the divine in you. Now breathe in again, deep, and open your eyes. I invite you to look around and to see who is in this space with you. You can turn around, look. Just do it silently. Okay, now, I'd like you to all stand up. And like this side to turn and face this side, and this side to turn and face this side. And, you can spread out some if you want to. Just look across and look around and see if you can catch the spark, that spark of holiness and divinity that I've been speaking of. Looking back at you. And then I'd like you to repeat after me and let the words come from deep inside, not just your voice box, but from your gut, from your heart. And as you say the words, speak them across the aisle to people. Repeat after me. Namaste. 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 The divine in me blesses and honors the divine in you. The divine in me blesses and honors the divine in you. The beauty of God stands before me.
The beauty of God stands before me.
Expressed uniquely as you.
Expressed uniquely as you.
The spirit of goodness within you.
The spirit of goodness within you.
Shines forth in all you do.
Shines forth in all you do.
Namaste.
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 The divine in me blesses and honors the divine in you.
Blesses and honors the divine in you.
You may be seated.